Welcome to A Kid's Life podcast. I'm Angela Lockwood, and for the last 20 years, I have been working in schools, supporting teachers to build inclusive classrooms. Through A Kid's Life podcast, my goal is to help us adults better understand the complexities of life as a kid. My guests and I share stories, reflections, and simple strategies to support kids of all needs as they walk through life. So whether you're looking for inspiration, direction, guidance, tips, or just a laugh, A Kid's Life podcast is the place for you. Enjoy. Welcome to A Kid's Life podcast. I'm Angela Lockwood, and today I am feeling a little bit selfish, I do have to admit, because I have invited a guest on here who I have always wanted to speak with. Her name is Dr. Kristy Goodwin. She's one of Australia's leading digital wellbeing and productivity speakers. She knows her stuff because she's been helping organisations like Apple, Macquarie Bank, Randstad, Foxtel, and a whole range of others to better understand the impact technology is having on employees' mental wellbeing, physical health, and productivity. But the reason she's on here is she also works with parents, schools, and the health industry in the area of technology for children. And this is such an area I'm passionate about, I'm so interested in, and I want to pick her brain really deeply today. So I'm going to have to be mindful of time. She also authored the book, Raising Your Child in a Digital World, which is so important. And if you haven't read it, I do suggest that you access that book. And she's also worked as an educator for 14 years in schools. So she's seen so many different aspects of working with children. She's also a university lecturer and also has a PhD in the impact of digital technologies. Can you see why I want her on here? I've invited Dr. Kristy here. She's going to help us better understand the digital world for our kids, which sounds like a huge promise in a short period of time, but I'm sure we're just going to scratch the surface. And we're going to look a little bit deeper also into how technology impacts physical health, mental wellbeing, and focus, but also dispel some of the myths around this as well. So, Dr. Kristy Goodwin, I am so excited to have you here, and welcome to A Kid's Life podcast.
Oh, thank you, Angela. And your listeners won't be able to tell, but I am blushing. That's such a lovely, genuine introduction. So thank you for having me. I'm hoping we can debunk some of the myths and misconceptions and help parents better understand their screen ages. I often refer to our kids as screen ages because it really is such a different world that we're all living in now. There's, very few aspects of our personal and professional lives where the digital tentacles haven't sort of crept into. So it is all pervasive, but it's not going away. So we need to try and find the best ways to live with it, rather than trying to go on what I call a mission for digital amputation, because that just doesn't work.
I do have to admit, Kristy, you do have some amazing phrases. I've heard you speak, I've watched your work, you have some of the, like digital amputation, and I would encourage you to use as many of those in our conversation today because it allows us parents to really hold on to and sort of have a better understanding of what that means. Digital amputation, it's perfect. You can understand what that would mean. So yeah, please.
I'll tell you what it means. If you've ever tried, as a parent, if you've ever tried to remove your child's digital appendage, i.e. their phone, their tablet, their gaming console, what you are doing is often it causes a techno tantrum. There's another little term for you. And we know that this is not necessarily, and we can dive into one of the common myths here, is that often parents say, and we use this as a throwaway term, say my child's addicted or my teen's addicted. They can't put down and insert their digital appendage. But the research actually tells us that very few children or teenagers would actually have a clinical addiction. What most kids and teens and adults, if we're really honest, would have is some problematic digital habits and behaviors. And it sounds like just a change in phrase, but it's not, because when we label someone with a very medically loaded word like saying they're addicted, we almost abdicate responsibility and say, well, they're addicted, there's nothing I can do about it, or I can't do very much. Whereas if we look at it more from some problematic behaviors, then we can start to shift and adjust their digital habits and behaviors and make some changes rather than just saying the problem's bigger than what I can manage.
What a fantastic place to start, because that sense of responsibility as parents is so important. And this definitely is not about guilt for parents. So parents that are listening, if you're like, oh my gosh, I've said that my child's addicted, or I've said these things that Kristy just mentioned, it is not about guilt, because I know through my work with parents that We are all experiencing the same overwhelm when it comes with our digital habits and our kids' digital habits. So
can I jump in there? And I'm sorry to interrupt. I think what you touched on is really pertinent, because I think as parents, we have to give ourselves some grace. There's no rule book, there's no guidebook or playbook about how you parent in this digital world. For most of us as modern parents, our frame of reference was analog childhoods and adolescence. We stared at the sky, not at a screen. We spent time with people, not with pixels. But today, research tells us by the time the average Australian child celebrates their 8th birthday, they have spent the equivalent of 1 full year of their life with digital technologies. So we are raising kids in a completely digitally saturated world, and we've got no frame of reference. The only digital dilemma that my mum faced was what television show I could watch, and it was usually one television channel on the one TV set that lived in the lounge room. But now screens have become omnipresent. They're on the stationery list at school in many instances. And so it's really hard for parents. And I think we need to acknowledge that we're all looking around at each other and often saying, look, how are you navigating this digital terrain? So I think we need to have much more open and more nuanced conversations. I think we need to eradicate, as you said, the techno guilt and the techno shame, parent bashing, or I call it shoulding. I really try to avoid shoulding on parents. I think we get should on all the time. But instead, I think what we need to do is to empower parents to make educated and informed decisions. And that's where, it might be a bias, but I'm fascinated with how our brain and body operates. And I think it's really hard to argue with neuroscience and psychology. So I look at, what do we know? How does the brain and body operate in a digital landscape, and how can we apply that knowledge to this digital world? So I just want to reiterate that parents shouldn't feel guilty. For most of us, we didn't have these digitalized childhoods. And so that means it's the very first time in all of history where a generation of kids, maybe even your 3-year-old or your 4-year-old, but a generation of young people know far more about a topic than what their parents, their caregivers, and their teachers do. And this is why we've got problems. We've got parents that are saying, hang on, what TikTok is, or they're asking for this F game, Fortnite, I think it is. And so because we don't have the digital language, we often say, hang on, I'm not sure how to navigate this terrain. And that's why I say to parents, go back to what you do have. We've got the brain architecture that your child, irrespective of their technical prowess, just doesn't have. So I think we need to stop the shaming, because when we have this shame and guilt, we don't have these open conversations.
And does that make it really hard for parents to it feels like we're handing over control a little bit, I would imagine, for some parents, is to go, I don't know this stuff, so therefore I guess it's either scary, so I don't want to deal with it, or I'll jump in with misinformation. Do you find that with parents, that it is almost a scary space to be in at the moment?
It is. And even as someone who researches this, I find this space, it's a completely moving landscape. The platforms and the apps and the tools and the technologies are constantly evolving and changing. And there's something in the research field called the penetration rate. And the penetration rate describes how many years it takes a technology to penetrate to 50 million global users. So the internet, when we used to dial up, do you remember the delayed gratification skills we demonstrate while you hear the deep. Imagine if kids had to wait for that today. Well, that took about 13 years until 50 million people globally adopted it. Facebook took 4 years. YouTube took 2 years. Angry Birds took 35 days. Pokemon Go, do you remember when that was the trend?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, it took 1 to 2 days to reach 50 million global users. And so this is why, in recent years, we've had the death by suicide that was streamed on social media platforms. We've had all sorts of challenges and inappropriate content that is shared. And so parents are looking around saying, I just can't keep up. And so that's why I say to parents, your job in this digital landscape is to be the pilot, or if you've got adolescents, be the co-pilot of the digital plane. And you need to be in the driver's seat, in the pilot's seat with your child as well. Because when they hit digital turbulence, when they see something inappropriate, when they're a victim of catfishing or cyberbullying, when they see pornography, violence, scary content, you can help them to course correct. If you're way back in economy class and they are in the pilot's seat, they don't have the brain architecture to navigate it, and they end up crashing the plane. So yes, the likelihood is that your child will know far more about the technology, but they don't have the corresponding brain architecture to deal with it, and you do. And so you've got life experience, you've got a catastrophe scale, you've got hindsight. That will stand you in very good stead to navigate this digital terrain, even if you're technical prowess may not be as competent.
You mentioned earlier around the neuroscience that sort of backs all of this. Why is it important for parents to understand the impact of neuroscience and how it leads into all of this?
Oh, again, I have a very biased view here. I think our understanding of the brain is critical to understanding us as humans. It's what makes us unique. It's what makes us tick. And again, it's good hard science. I'm cautious, Kristy, so I like to fall back on what do we know for certain? What do we know for sure? And it's really hard to argue with neuroscience. Neuroscience gives us a very clear, fairly predictable trajectory in terms of what developmental milestones we should make and children should make. And again, I'm acknowledging there are some children who are neurodivergent and may meet different milestones at different rates. But generally speaking, neuroscience helps us to understand I call it our neurobiological blueprint. We basically come with an operating manual. Remember when we used to actually have hard copy printed? They send those annoying discs when you buy anything new now, or you just go to a URL and download your manual. But when we had an operating manual, this tells us how we operate. And for our kids, we know that their prefrontal cortex, so the part of the brain that helps them with problem solving, good decisions, I often say it's their CEO or the air traffic control system of their brain, their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed. And in fact, it doesn't develop until early 20s for females and late 20s for males. This part of the brain helps them with their self-regulation or impulse control. If your child doesn't have impulse control, giving them a powerful digital tool that can take photos, that can send nasty messages, that can Google inappropriate words, means they're very vulnerable to some of the potential pitfalls. And it doesn't matter how many conversations you've talked to your son or daughter about, taking appropriate photos, writing kind comments online, they don't have that self-regulation center regulated. So when we understand that, it again exemplifies just what a critical role parents play. And again, understanding that part of the brain often switches off at night. It's worked hard, especially at school all day, trying to keep it together and listen to my teacher and stop wiggling, that impulse control center is absolutely depleted at the end of the day. And at nighttime, their limbic brain, so particularly their amygdala, which is their emotional hub, it fires up. This is why most cyberbullying takes place at night. Their logical brain is turned off and their amygdala emotional brain is turned on. So when we understand this, again, we can start to put in place some strategies. Maybe it's limiting their use of social media at night. Maybe it's keeping, and I suggest this, trying to keep digital devices in centrally located spots in the house, keeping them out of bedrooms, having a digital curfew, a cutoff time where devices go on what I call a landing zone, a designated spot. But understanding that brain science really helps us to then figure out how we operate in this digital world we're in.
So there were some really amazing strategies and very simple strategies that you just talked about then. So if I could just recap a couple, was things like not having devices in bedrooms or having a digital curfew, having a landing space in your home where everybody can have their devices. I think they're all such important tools. And I know in my work with parents, I often hear them say, oh, no, my child doesn't have a device in their room. I never allow that. But then you have a quick chat to the child and they're like, I was up till 1 o'clock at night, on talking to someone. My most alarming one, I can remember a young girl in year 5 telling me about this friend of hers, this German guy who she talks to after she goes to bed. Now, I remember just hearing that go, oh, what? You're in year 5? What are you doing? And I said, do your parents know that? She said, oh, no, they don't know I've got a device in my room. And so there's this whole sense of open communication, I understand too, is really important with parents and kids, and knowing what your kids are up to. One of the things that I've heard you speak about a little bit is how much time kids spend on devices is not necessarily the thing we should be really focusing on. I find this fascinating. Can you tell us, what should we be focusing on then?
Okay, so I'm so glad you brought this up, because I really believe that having a narrow obsession or focusing on time as our only metric really overlooks really important considerations when it comes to screen time. I'm not for a moment suggesting that we don't give kids limits, because we all acknowledge as parents, if we let them have free reign, they'd be probably tethered to technology most of the day. What I am suggesting is that we need to be having more nuanced conversations. How much time our kids are spending online is important in regards to what their time is displacing. So I often refer to this as the displacement effect or the opportunity cost. So for every hour our child is sitting down watching YouTube videos or scrolling through TikTok or playing Fortnite or Minecraft, there's an hour not spent playing outside, hanging upside down from trees, reading, chatting with their friends, doing fine motor skills and gross motor skills that we once did. And it's this opportunity cost that I think we really need to be focusing on. I say to parents, I think what we really need to be focusing on is what screen time is displacing, what they are doing online. That they're, I think, by far more important than just narrowly saying how much. Because what I have found working with lots of parents is parents say, my child meets the government's 2 hours of screen time, whatever their age is. For primary school children, it is 2 hours of recommended sedentary screen-based media a day. And before you gasp, that's not necessarily what I'm prescribing, but that's our current Australian guidelines. But when you dig a little bit deeper and you figure out what were they doing with those 2 hours, was it an age-appropriate game? Was it leisure? Was it learning? Was it active? Was it passive? Were they creating a virtual world and interacting with their peers and problem solving, or were they just sitting there passively consuming TikTok video after TikTok video? So we need to be having those broader conversations. So I think the bigger question is, what is their time displacing? And that's where I say to parents, that's why you can come up with a really simple formula for how much time. Because when we think about the opportunity cost, we need to think about having our children's most basic physical and psychological needs being met. So if they're getting enough sleep, are they physically active? Are they playing? Are they hearing and using language? Are they getting enough sleep? Are all their vital developmental milestones being met? If so, then we could add in some screen time. But what's happening in most Australian households is that we start with an empty vessel for time, and what fills the vessel up first is screen time. And all of a sudden, we're seeing some of those vital skills. Kids that aren't getting enough sleep, who aren't physically active, who aren't playing, who don't have the language skills that they once had. And that is because of that opportunity cost.
Oh, I feel like I just want to jump through the screen and give you a hug right now, Kristy. Of course, the masterclass, if you're listening to this in March, is that I'm running the parent masterclass is about helping your kids to love playing outside again. And I think that's, play, being an occupational therapist is such an important thing, that my whole world is through play and having fun. And I even find it as a real struggle as a parent and as a health professional working with kids to balance that. I'm even seeing a lot of therapists that are coming into sessions now where a lot of their activities are on iPads. And, a lot of devices are starting, I feel, to come into a lot of different aspects of our life, even, with the lockdowns over the last couple of years, online learning. And, there's a lot of fun games. I know my son has to track, he's a part of a sporting sort of training program where they have to actually track what physical activity they're doing during the day. So, it's a physical activity being tracked through an app. So you just see this filtering through all aspects of our lives. As a parent, firstly, for our listeners, what are some of the things that parents really should look for to just some of the behaviours that their children might be exhibiting if it's getting a little bit too much for them? That not necessarily the time, but what are the behaviours that parents should be looking at going, hang on, things might be getting a little tiny bit out of control here?
Yeah, and I'm happy to answer those, but I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying. I often talk about green time. So time outside in nature is so important to balance screen time. And we've got some good evidence that's telling us that children need at least 2 hours of natural sunlight spread throughout their day. It doesn't have to be a 2-hour stint outside, but accumulative. They need 2 hours in sunlight for a couple of reasons. One is that we've got new research telling us that can actually help prevent myopia, which is nearsightedness. Now, we thought we were seeing a spike, and we are. We are definitely seeing a spike in rates of nearsightedness in children, teens, and adults. But it's not necessarily because we're looking at screens. It's because we are spending so much on screens. We're not getting the time that we used to have out in natural sunlight. And when we are outside, we develop that depth of vision naturally. You have to look at the ball that's hurtling towards you or the tree in the distance. The other reason is that we need to get at least 2 hours, and ideally we get it in the earlier part of the day, but 2 hours of natural sunlight to help reset our circadian rhythms. Again, because of our increased blue light exposure, because of our time spent in front of laptops and tablets and smartphones and the whole plethora of digital devices, we're being exposed to far more blue light than ever before. So circling back to what parents might need to look for if their kids have started to enter sort of problematic areas, this is where it can become tricky, because some of these diagnostic criteria are also what we call typical stages of childhood or adolescent development. So it's hard to sometimes disentangle. But some red flags that you might look for is that they need to use digital devices for increasing amounts of time to get the same levels of satisfaction. You might start to see some deceitful behavior. So they start to lie about where they're going or what they're doing or what they're playing online. You might see a radical shift in their grades or attendance rates at school. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've got problematic behaviors. You might see a radical shift in their behavior when they don't have access. I know for some families, when they went for a couple of days in recent times where they had no Wi-Fi access, no cellular data, their kids became physically aggressive in some instances. Kids became dysregulated because they weren't getting their dose of digital. That can be a sign of withdrawal. So we can see these changes in any relationships, changes in activities that they once enjoyed. And again, I know I keep repeating it, these can just be normal stages of development. But if you have any of those sort of red flags, particularly in terms of increasing amounts of time, which we call tolerance, then coupled with some of those other red flags, it would be worthwhile seeking professional guidance. And there are now wonderful cyber psychologists, people who really work in this expert space. So there are a wealth of people that you can go and get expert guidance from in that regard.
Well, I know all of your work that you do too, Kristy, is a space where parents can go to for more information. And of course, on your website, we will link everything to it. But on your website, drkristygoodwin.com, there's masterclasses on there. There's workshops for parents and teachers and also corporate spaces, which is interesting in itself. And I feel like I could speak to you about the corporate space a whole nother time. But one of the things I often get asked by parents is the age at which children should be on social media. You know, we hear that 13 is the cutoff, and we all know that that's just a number. I see kids as young as in sort of year 1 doing the TikTok dances. It's so crazy. And you know, it's TikTok dances because, you know, everybody's doing the same thing. What age, or not necessarily the age, because clearly that's just a number, but how can parents know when it's a good time, not just for social media, but maybe for a device when their child's ready? How do parents know?
So I hope you don't think I'm dodging your question, but it is just like it's hard to give an exact amount of screen time. It's actually really impossible to prescribe an exact age when kids are ready to be dunked in the digital stream. I say, having spoken to thousands of parents throughout the world, not just here in Australia, I have never, ever, ever met one parent who has said to me, Kristy, I really regret holding out and delaying giving my child a screen or social media or access to a game. But I certainly have plenty of conversations from parents saying, I wished I had paused. I wished I had waited a little bit longer, because once I gave them the phone, the app, the game, it opened the floodgates and you can't go back. And so I say to parents, in most instances, the legal age of 13 isn't necessarily when children are psychologically ready to cope with social media or having a phone or playing a particular game. Let's be honest, a lot of adults don't know how to behave respectfully and responsibly on social media platforms. 13 is actually when it's legal for tech companies to mine data from minors. That's the only reason we have that 13 years of age for most games or apps. So I say to parents, where you can, delay the introduction of screens, delay the introduction of social media. But I'm also a mum to 3 kids who knows firsthand how prevalent peer pressure is. My 11-year-old, almost 12-year-old son is convinced he's the only boy in all of Australia who doesn't have his first smartphone yet. He will soon get one. We're contemplating getting him closer to his 12th, possibly his 13th birthday, but he is certainly in the minority. And so we've had conversations about these are the rules that we're having in our house. I have found that when you give kids facts, when you give them science and reasons for your decision, they're much more amenable. Doesn't mean they necessarily like it. And that's why I often say being that pilot of the plane or co-pilot of the digital plane, one of the things you've got to establish is you have to set boundaries and borders with your child. Not on them. It's not giving them an iPad contract or a technology agreement. They don't work. Your child needs buy-in. But when you can give them with their involvement, when you can set up these, I call them your digital guardrails, then your child understands why. Again, they're a bit like vegetables. I think Kids need them. They'll never say they like them and they want them, but they most certainly need them in their life. And so if we can give our kids those parameters and give them reasons for why those strategies in place without scaring them. I don't want to say to my son, I don't want you to have a phone because I don't want you to see pornography, or I don't want unkind people messaging you. It's a delicate balance, but I think giving them the facts and science, and in many instances, falling back on the legal argument. The age recommendation for this app is 13 years of age. For every other rule or law we uphold, but we'll break the rule on this one. That's a really hard moral standpoint to come back from. So I say, where possible, and I say this in an empowering way to parents, you know your children best. If they lose their school lunchbox, if they cannot keep their school blazer for a whole term, why on earth would you give them a $600, $700, $800, sometimes $2,000 device that they could potentially lose? So first of all, check that they're responsible. Then look at their self-regulation skills. When you're giving them a phone or an app or a game, you're giving them access to a global community. You're giving them access to a camera. So they have the skills and competencies that they have to navigate that. And then my last question is asking, do you have the time? As a parent, I can barely manage my own social media. I dread the day. I've got 3 sons. I dread the day when I'm still managing, looking, checking, and I encourage parents to do this, the digital audit with them. So do you have the time to help them? Because we'd never, ever, ever throw kids into the water and just hope that they teach themselves to swim. Why would we throw them into a digital landscape and just hope that they teach themselves? We have to take the time, and it's a long road. That prefrontal cortex is many years to develop. So I hope I answered that. You know your child best. Delay it as long as possible are the 2 big key things there.
And what I love about listening to you then, it's not about understanding how to play Minecraft or, what all these games actually, the rules of it all and what happens. It's actually first and foremost what I'm hearing, Kristy, is that it's understanding your child and setting those boundaries like we do everything else that they do in their lives. The digital space doesn't have to be scary and overwhelming. It's about making that open connection and building trust with your child around this new thing that we're all navigating together. And I really appreciate you taking the time to go through that with us. Again, I could speak to you for days and days and days because you're such a wealth of knowledge. And Dr. Kristy's also kindly offered to share a digital wellbeing checklist, and we will provide that link in the download in the show notes below the episode. So thank you for being so kind with that. What will parents be able to learn from that digital wellbeing checklist, Kristy, when they download that?
So first and foremost, I've created as a PDF that you can print and put on your fridge or put above the study, because I know as an adult, I suffer from digital dementia. I listen to podcasts and think, oh, that's a great idea, or that's a good strategy, and then I forget it. And I blame old age. It's not old age. It's literally digital dementia. Our memory-making skills are diminishing because, I'll give you another word here, we are suffering from infobesity. There is just so much information being thrust at us in this digital world that our memory-making capacity isn't necessarily shrinking, but its capacity in proportion to the information is just so insignificant. So having it there will help you. It's basically really practical tips that you can apply to look after your child's physical health. So things like their vision, their hearing, their musculoskeletal health when they are spending time online, how you can stop screens from sabotaging their sleep, how you can get screens to look after rather than hamper their mental well-being. So really practical sort of checklist items that you can say, let's target this habit this week. And the idea is that they're little micro habits that families can build on over time and hopefully develop some digital well-being skills in the process.
Perfect. I've just signed up to it. So if you see Angela Lockwood come up in your I'm just doing it for a friend, I do think my favorite term that you've used throughout this whole chat is infobesity. Never heard it. Absolutely love it. My head feels like it's in that.
I feel like that emoji, the emoji with the headaches. I feel like if I was to pick an emoji, like picking a favorite kid, hard to do, but we all deep down know we've got one every day. My favorite emoji at the moment is that exploded head. I just feel like so many of us, and it doesn't matter who I speak to, whether they're an academic, a professional, paraprofessional, a health professional, an educator, so many people are just feeling like there's just this constant barrage of digital distractions. It's the WhatsApp message, your Teams message, your phone calls, your reminders, your calendar alerts and notifications, the pings and dings that have become the soundtrack of our day. And I have to say it's getting worse. It's not getting better. And so that's where I think we've got to circle back to what we talked about at the beginning. Go back to what's our neurobiological blueprint. We can't outperform our biology. So we've got to find smarter, better, more sustainable ways to operate in this digital world. So hopefully that PDF, it's a big promise, but will help give you some respite from the mental load.
Well, I know exactly where I'm going to start with my infobesity, but yeah, Kristy, thank you so much. I knew having you on here would be such a valuable conversation to have. And for all parents, please take away that you're not doing any of this alone, that, talk to any parents. We're all trying to somehow navigate this. And thanks to people like yourself, Dr. Kristy Goodwin, you're helping to, give us the facts and trying to simplify what feels like an overwhelming space, but with simple strategies. We can do this as parents, and we've just got to be really open with each other and go to leaders in the field like Kristy. So Kristy, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been such a delight, as always, having a chat to you.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you for what you're doing, because we all know it takes a village to raise children. And now we've got this wonderful digital village where we can tap into people who can support families in different ways. And I think that's a wonderful blessing for living in this modern age. So thank you, and for all the work you do.
Thanks so much. I've been joined today on a Kids Life podcast with Dr. Kristy Goodwin. And to find out more about Dr. Kristy, just go to all the links at the bottom of the show notes, and her digital platforms are over at drkristygoodwin.com. It's very easy to find where Dr. Kristy Goodwin is. She has so much information out there that is super valuable to us parents, health professionals, teachers, and anybody who is in the space of really looking after the mental, physical, social well-being of our kids. So until next time, please jump over to my website at angelalockwood.com.au, where you can look at all the different parent masterclasses I have coming up over the next 12 months. And the March masterclass is very much focused on helping your kids to love playing outside again. Thanks for joining me. I'm Angela Lockwood, and until next time, enjoy. Thank you for listening to a Kids Life podcast. To stay up to date on all the new episodes, please subscribe on all the places where podcasts are found. If you want to learn more about my teacher and parent programs, please go to angelalockwood.com.au. Until next time, slow down, have fun, and take care of our kids.